Thank you, Danny. Turn with me, if you would, your Bibles to the Gospel of John, chapter 12. Gospel of John, chapter 12. We're going to start reading around verse 12. I don't know if you were part of the decision or how long all of you have been here or any of you have been here. I don't know who chose for our stained glass up here, this image and this, but I believe both of them are very important. And I was impressed the very first time I came to this sanctuary that this is the picture of Jesus as he prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. It was the night that he was being arrested. The cross, of course, is the Roman tool of execution. It was very common in his day. I imagine that Jesus and his family and people in Jerusalem, they grew up. Rome had been under Israel and all of Israel under its dominion since before Jesus was born for a very long time. And they would crucify people, nail people to a cross beam, and display them in very prominent places in the city. And it was very gruesome and very terrible. I can't imagine having to go to the market or going to a festival or going about your daily life in the city of Jerusalem or other places. It didn't happen just in Jerusalem. I imagine almost any place where people lived in Rome, if someone needed to be made an example of, they were crucified in that place. Rome was everywhere. You can still go to places all over the land of Israel, and someone will say, this road was built by Romans. You can tell this is a Roman road. There's a saying that I've heard all my life saying, all roads lead to Rome. That saying came to be during the time of the Roman Empire. They were road builders. If they could build roads, they could control commerce, and they could move their armies into place and into positions of strategic importance very, very quickly. They were good soldiers. They were good at cruelty and war. Imagine taking your son or your daughter, your family, and just going to the market, just going to buy groceries and have to walk past people dying on a cross. When Jesus began getting closer and closer to the time in which he was going to offer his life, his ministry only lasted, by some estimations, only about 3.5 years. But if he said something about, if I, the Son of Man, be lifted up, I'll draw all men to me. Well, they knew exactly what he was talking about. We might say, if I lifted up, you mean put on a pedestal or glorified, or if a light of attention, is that what you mean by if I be lifted up? No, they'd say, well, did you hear about Levi? He was lifted up yesterday. He's going to be, what is the sentence that he received? He's going to be lifted up. It became a part of their modern vocabulary, part of modern parlance and conversation. When Jesus talked to his disciples and said, if you're going to follow me, you've got to take up your cross and follow me. They had seen people marched through the streets bearing their own cross, carrying their own tool of execution. It's like having to build your own gallows before you're hanged. Part of the humiliation. Public, very public. Part of the spectacle. I like reading about the Old West, but it seems so gruesome that often when they had public executions in our country, yes, even in the United States of America, people in the past, we thought it was important to have public executions, and they would have hangings. And people would sell refreshments and concessions, pass out brochures and bulletins. It was almost like church. And people were there for the spectacle. Not just the people who lived thereabouts, but people would travel for miles to see someone that maybe they had never even heard of be hanged. Human beings, we're a strange lot, aren't we? We come to the place, and today, throughout Christendom, we call this day Palm Sunday. This is the Sunday before Easter. But according to the biblical chronology, that Jesus and his disciples came into Jerusalem on a Sunday, and he entered Jerusalem in a procession, a parade. We're going to read about that here in just a minute. It's called his triumphant entry. And there was a great deal of clamor. People were shouting and waving and singing. And it seemed that Jesus was loved by all, but he wasn't. It was just another part of the spectacle. There were thousands and thousands of people in Jerusalem because it was the time of one of their very high feasts. They had it every year. But they could only have it in Jerusalem, and if you were a good Jew, if you practiced Judaism and you were going to practice your faith, you had to come to where the temple was. And so people came and they packed out all of the inns, all of the places to stay. They stayed with family and friends. People rented out their guest rooms or their main rooms, sometimes their master rooms, or sometimes they let people sleep in their stalls or in their mangers. And there were always thousands and thousands of people. Terry and I have been in Jerusalem when it was just an average day, like a Tuesday or Wednesday, and it's so crowded there by the people who live there and all the tourists who are there. And going through the market in Jerusalem is just elbow to elbow people. Our guide always said, keep your hand on your wallet and over your neck. Go have a good time. Just don't let anybody kill you or take your money away from you. We kept our money, our passport and everything in a little pouch, hanging around your neck, put it inside your shirt. And then there's this thought that goes through your mind, okay, that's good. Now they'll have to kill you if they want to get it. That seems well thought through. I kind of want to put a sign around my neck just ask me for my stuff, I'll give it to you. But you didn't want to do that either. By the time Jesus got to the Garden of Gethsemane that week, that night that he was going to be arrested, he had not seen anything worth dying for. Jesus had not seen anyone much worth dying for. And so at the Garden of Gethsemane, I've been there. I believe it's one of the most holy, sacred places on the planet. That's where Jesus struggled with his humanity. It doesn't bother me that he struggled. He prayed, he asked God. He prayed 3 times. Is there some other way? If it's possible for you to do what you need to do, he's talking to his heavenly Father, if it's possible, some other way. Heaven was silent. He didn't get an answer to his prayers. You ever prayed and didn't get an answer to your prayer and sounded like God was just ignoring you? Jesus knows what that feels like. You're going to die for these people. Have you ever been put in a position where you were going to do something, or you were expected to perform in a certain way, or there was a certain course that you needed to take, and yet it just didn't seem that you were going to be appreciated, or that it was going to do any good, or that it was really worth doing? As Jesus had taken on flesh and become like me and you, there's no doubt that, it really would have bothered me if he had been happy about what he knew was coming. If he had been excited about going to the cross, or if he knew that what he was going to go do was going to be enjoyable, but he knew everything about it. And if it looked like I would just thought he was a lunatic, he was just in some way that he was unhinged. Someone who was not only wanting to die, but wanting to die on the cross. Well, let's look here at John 12:12. On the next day, he's talking about Sunday morning, much of the people that came to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him. They cried, Hosanna! It's a word that means save now. Save now. These people were looking for a glimmer of hope. They were living under terrible oppression. Most of them had lived their entire lives under the dominion of a cruel ruler. Hosanna, save now. Blessed is the King of Israel that comes in the name of the Lord. Those were treasonous words. Treasonous words. Anybody saying those words or singing those words could have been crucified. There was a king of Israel, and his name was Herod. There was a governor, and his name was Pilate. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written. He's talking about a quotation here from the Old Testament. Fear not, daughter of Zion, because your king comes sitting on an ass's colt. These things understood not his disciples at the first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him, and that he had done these things before them. Have you ever been misunderstood? Or maybe not misunderstood, but people just didn't understand. It's not that they understood something and it was wrong, but they just didn't have any understanding at all. There's not anything they understood about you. These men, these people that had been with Jesus and walked with him and talked with him and listened to him, they never, at this point, none of them got it. None of them got it. I don't know if you know what I mean when I say that. I have a clear understanding. To get something, for the light to come on, to see and have understanding. There's a lot of things I don't see, a lot of things I don't understand. But right here it just says, they were waving the palm branches and singing and chanting and just walking along with Jesus, and they didn't understand what it was all about. If you'd asked them, they probably could tell you what it was, an explanation. They might have even been able to say, well, this is a quote from the Old Testament that they're singing, and this is what we're doing, and this is what this means. But they were all wrong and didn't have a clue. The people, it says in verse 17, the people, therefore, that were with him when he called Lazarus out of the grave and raised him from the dead, bear record. That's a hot topic. Who is this guy? Who are we singing to? You mean you don't know who Jesus of Nazareth is? He's the guy. Have you heard about that guy, Lazarus, raised from the dead? Yes, Jesus raised him from the dead. Been dead 4 days. For this cause, the people who also met him, they'd heard about him having done this miracle. The Pharisees, therefore, said among themselves, perceive ye how you prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. Everything that they had done, every step of the way, they bad-mouthed Jesus. They poor-mouthed Jesus. They asked him leading questions. You could tell that the Bible often says, he asked, Lord, what's the greatest commandment? Or, Lord, how am I going to get to heaven? The writer of the gospel said they weren't asking these questions because they were seeking truth or because they wanted to know. They were just trying to fumble Jesus up, trying to tangle him up, trying to confuse him, trying to catch him out. I love questions. I'm a curious person. I'm a question asker. I'm bothered by sometimes questions when I don't have answers, and some I'm not, but I ask questions. And I love to hear people asking questions. You ever been around children much? They ask lots of questions. But it really disturbs me when I hear people asking questions and they don't want to know what the answer is. They don't care about what you're about to say. They're using a question like it was a sword or a knife or a weapon. They're just trying to harm you, just trying to hurt you. Sometimes people are going to come up to you and ask you a question. It's not because they want to know something or want you to say, but they're really trying to hurt you, trying to harm you. You have to be so careful these days. There have been times when that I misunderstood people's motives and I wasn't aware. And people have asked me and I stepped right into their trap. I always try to give truthful answers. I always try to say what I mean or believe. But there are just a lot of times when we ought to be, when I'll say it this way, there's just a lot of times when I wish I'd have been quiet. Bill Engvall has a song. It hasn't been nearly as popular as Here's Your Son, but he tried to start another little catchphrase several years ago called, he entitled it, I should have shut up. Should have shut up. Should have said this or that. These people had dogged Jesus every step of the way with every kind of negativity, every kind of attack. The thing is that when those things run out, the only thing that is left usually is physical violence. You know, when people are trying to trick you up and trip you up, this is what you need to know when you're they'll ask you questions and then they might try to pick apart your answer, or they'll reshape your answer and dice it up and give your answer in a bad light. That's kind of like phase one. But when that doesn't work, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You can destroy people with words. They hadn't been able to destroy Jesus. They hadn't been able to trip him up. It's so easy to trip me up, make me say stupid things. And that's like phase two. You'll know among those who are after you, or, and it's not, if you think people are after you, it may be that people are after you. It may just be paranoid, but they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. You can see that they moved into phase two with Jesus. They started calling him names. When there are people who are after you, or people who are trying to hurt you or harm you, when people have an agenda of anger or hatred or jealousy, when they get to the place where it doesn't appear that they're going to be able to get you to destroy yourself, they'll just call you a dummy. Oh, you big dummy. You're an idiot. You're insane. That means they've run out of questions. They've run out of arguments. They started calling Jesus a heretic and started calling him a traitor. They called him a winebibber. Jesus, he picked up on this. He said, they're calling me a winebibber. That means somebody drinks so much wine he needs a bib. Call me a winebibber. So he said, John the Baptist came and he didn't eat he didn't drink any wine. They said, well, he's a nut. And he says, I come along, I'm drinking wine with you, so they call me a winebibber. You didn't think Jesus invented damned if you do and damned if you don't, did you? Yeah, he invented that phrase. Not quite as crass as I just said it. No way to win with these guys. The whole world has gone after him. The whole world has gone after him. Look at verse 20. Before I read verse 20, let me say, we've looked at several things that when Jesus did this, it made this is how the Pharisees and the religious leaders responded. Or when this happened, this is what Judas did, his traitor. And we're seeing the world and how they're responding to Jesus. But Jesus was also looking for signs from God. Here's the big sign right here. In verse 20, John's Gospel, chapter 12, verse 20, there were certain Greeks. It doesn't mean they were from Greece. It doesn't mean they were Greeks, Greek people. This was a word that was used to categorize in the mind of John and other people of his day. It meant people who weren't Jewish. Anybody. They were all called Greeks. Didn't have anything to do with the country of Greece or what language they spoke. Some Gentiles. It's probably what me and you are. We're not Jews. They came up to worship at the feast. Now that's strange. There were people who were Gentiles who believed in the God of the Jews. And they observed. You see, their feast had nothing to do with eating food. Yeah, they had food. But the feasts were commanded by God. They had the Feast of the Passover. They had the Feast of Pentecost. There were about a dozen different feasts on the Hebrew calendar. Festivals. The Festival of Weeks. The Festival of Tents. And so it doesn't mean that they came for the food, but because each of these feasts had something to do with a variety of different things that was often having to do with food. But it wasn't about eating something. It wasn't about being hungry or getting nutrition. It wasn't about having a big meal, because Feast of the Passover was just some little bitty pieces of herbs and bread without any yeast in it, and it really wasn't a meal at all. These Greeks, they came to Jerusalem. These people came to Philip, who was from the state of Galilee. And they came and said, "Sir, we would see Jesus." Sir, we would see Jesus. Now, to us that sounds like a demand. We're going to see Jesus. That's not what it's saying. The way we would say it, we could still use the word would, but we'd say, "Sir," and very respectful. Philip was just a fisherman. "Sir, we would like to see Jesus. Sir, we would like to see," not, "Sir, we would see Jesus." We would say it perhaps another way. We might say it another way. "Mister, we want to see Jesus. We want to see Jesus." Now look at this. Philip came and he told Andrew, and Philip went to tell Jesus. Jesus, strangest thing, there are some Gentiles out here. Now, they didn't talk to Gentiles much. They didn't do business with Gentiles. Kind of spit on the ground about the mention of Gentiles. They were anti-Gentile. They were very, Gentile is not perhaps a race of people. We call everything racist these days. Even people who aren't, we say, well, if you don't like a group of people, you're racist. But there are some races, and then they're not racist at all. The Jews and the Gentiles didn't mix very much. They came and they told Jesus, "Jesus, there's some Gentiles out here, and they're saying they'd like to." And we know that they had probably seen Jesus, because when Jesus came in to Jerusalem that day, I think everybody came out and they had probably, with their eyes, seen Jesus. And so Philip and Andrew knew what they were saying. We watched him ride in on the donkey. We want to meet Jesus. We'd like to have an audience with Jesus. We'd like you to introduce us to Jesus. We want to talk to Jesus. They didn't just say, "We want to get a look at him." They knew exactly the question that was being asked. We want to see Jesus. We want to meet him. The thing is, and this is a thing, we don't know from this passage or any other passage in the Bible if Jesus ever granted them an audience or not. If I were to have my guess, I would say Jesus did not consent to meet with them. When Jesus called and ordained his original disciples, he told them not to go out and preach the gospel, but he says only preach it to the lost sheep of Israel. He was saying only go to the Jewish people. When Paul said in Romans chapter 1, he says, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God to all who believe it, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." If you don't understand the theology of the coming Messiah, see, Jesus was a Jewish Messiah. And he came from God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Hebrew prophets had foretold the coming of the Anointed One, the Christ, the Messiah. And if you'll pardon the crudeness of this statement, they were going to get the first shot. If you read John's Gospel, chapter 1, it says, He was in the world, and the world was made by Him, and the world knew Him not. You know, the Pharisees and the leaders were actually wrong. The whole world wasn't going after Jesus. It just seemed that way to them. He was in the world was made by Him, and the world knew Him not. He came into His own. In other words, He came to the Jews. He came into His own, and His own received Him not. Then one of the greatest verses, I believe it's on a par with John's verse in chapter 3, verse 16. He came into His own received Him not. And verse 12 says, But as many as received Him, and those who did receive Him, to them gave He the power to become the children of God, just by believing in His name. Sir, we want to see Jesus. We don't know if Jesus ever said, Go tell them to come on in, we'll have a chat. There's no evidence that He ever did that. But the very fact that they showed up, the very fact, it says, look right here. Look at verse 23. And this was Jesus' answer to them. The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. It seems obvious to me that in the eternal decrees of eternity past, that it was decided. When John baptizes you, the Holy Spirit's going to come as a sign to him, come down out of heaven like a dove. And oh, by the way, you're going to know when it's your time to die, because Gentile people who don't have anything to do with the Hebrew faith, wouldn't ordinarily, at least evidently were coming to the festival. There's a long story behind why they were interested in Jesus or why they were in Jerusalem at all. There's a long story. I want to find out what that story is, who these guys were. It doesn't even give them a name. I want to find out when I get to heaven, who are those guys? Did you ever get to see Jesus? Did you ever get to meet Him? But Jesus knew that this was a sign that said, this is not about Judaism. It's not about a little small group of people that live in the land of Israel. This is about the whole world. And here's the evidence. There are some Gentile people who are coming here and say, well, we don't know how everybody else feels, but we want to see Jesus. I don't know if you understand how odd it is. I don't know if you even know a Jewish person. Do you know a Jew? Do you know someone who's a Jew? They're really scarce here in Alabama. It's not a real big calling for Jewish people. I guess there's probably a synagogue in Huntsville. I don't know. There may be even a synagogue here in Morgan County that I don't know about it. I don't know where it's at. There's probably a synagogue in Birmingham, Montgomery, Tuscaloosa perhaps. Not many Jewish people. Isn't it strange? You know, if we see that often Jesus' followers called Him Master. We see the word and they said, Master, or good Master. Do you know that that's a translation of the word Rabbi?
Yeah, Rabbi.
It's Rabbi. They were calling Him Rabbi. If you were walking down at the mall or walking on the street and you saw a Jewish rabbi who was identifiably so, maybe by his attire or the way he carried, if you met somebody and he, not just talking about stereotypical appearances, but if it became obvious to you, you probably wouldn't go up and speak to him because he kind of looked strange or odd to you. His hair was different. His clothing was cut differently. He had a completely different worldview from you. Friends, for you and I to be, when my family used to come from Michigan to see us, Danny and I were born in Michigan. When they would come down here to visit us, they would say, we're going to see the hillbillies. My cousin Joanne would say, we're here to see the hillbillies. Didn't know what a redneck was then. And we don't use the word hillbilly much anymore. I didn't know what a hillbilly was, but I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a hillbilly. I was pretty sure we were not Beverly hillbillies. I'm pretty sure we were like Alabama hillbillies. Completely different. The same, only without the money. Don't you think it odd that we're gathered here today to worship a Jewish rabbi? If you and I sat in a synagogue, we would know what to sing or what to say or how to pray. And when they started quoting the scripture in Hebrew, we'd just have to look like a calf looking at a new gate. Yet we love Jesus. Jesus is all the world to us. I have some very dear friends who are black people, and I've talked to them sometime, and I said, you know, it's even stranger that you love Jesus. They're Christian people. I said, you know, your people were brought over here as slaves, and your slave owners took you to church with them, and you learned about Jesus. And I know many, many black people who worship Jesus and love Jesus and are wonderful Christians, and it seems to be like an extra bit of oddness. I think, do you appreciate how odd that is, or how strange that is? That you would, a black man who came here as a slave, and your slave owner told you about Jesus, and your people believed in Jesus, and today you worship Jesus, and you're hoping, your greatest hope in one day is one day you'll see Jesus? I want you to see that when some Gentiles showed up here and said, we want to see Jesus, like Philip said, what? Stay right here. Don't move. Because you see, his first response was, no, you can't see Jesus. I'm not going to just grab you by the hand, take you to Jesus. I'm going to go talk to somebody about this. Andrew, there's some guys here, they want to see Jesus. And Andrew, you know what he said? What? Why? Philip said, I don't know. Well, they at least had enough sense to realize, well, I believe this is over our head. I don't want to tell them no, because if Jesus finds out, remember when we sent the kids away? Yeah, I remember that. That didn't work out too well. It made Jesus mad. Don't be bringing them kids around Jesus. Jesus said, what? Bring them kids up here. You're not going to get into heaven unless you're like one of these kids. I just know Jesus is going to find out. All we got to do is go tell them people, oh, y'all can't see Jesus. Jesus is going to say, what are y'all talking about over here? So we just, never mind. And so they finally said, we better take this to Jesus. And Jesus, there are some people here, they're nasty, uncircumcised Gentiles. And they want to see you. They want to talk to you. They want to meet you. One day the gospel would be offered to everybody. It's very, very hard for the original Christians to grasp that. They thought, we're the people of God. We're the chosen people of Israel. God doesn't even love Gentiles. It was very, very hard for early Christians to decide that God loved everybody. Let me close today by telling you this. You're like Philip or Andrew. People don't want to meet you, probably. They don't want to meet me. They don't want to hear my sermons. They don't want to hear you pray. You tell somebody, well, I'll be praying for you. They don't care. They don't care you're going to be praying for them. They don't care if you do or you don't. The only possibility of some kind of interest or concern, the only thing that might possibly happen in the hearts and minds of lost people or non-Christian people is who Jesus is. And if I can meet him, if he's real, and if what he said and what he did, is it true? And does it matter? That's why your job and mine is to somehow get people who will give you the time of day, or who will give you an audience, or who might listen to you, or whom you may get to know, or they may get to know you in some way. Get them to Jesus. Get them to read something about Jesus. Get them to listen to something Jesus said. Get them in some way to pray to Jesus and call out to God in Jesus' name. That's what my whole life has been about, is somehow when I can get someone's attention, I'm not saying, hey, look at me. Or I'm not saying, I have some very important things to tell you. All I can do is say, I want to introduce you to Jesus. He'll take it from there. You don't trust me? I understand that. You don't believe what I'm saying? Completely understandable. Can I help you? Can I change your life? Can I save your soul? Can I forgive your sin? I can't do any of those things. You cannot help people with the things that are the greatest threat to their life and soul. You might be able to loan someone some money, or feed someone some food, or give someone a job, or clothe someone who is naked. You may be able to befriend someone who is lonely or hurting. But when it comes to eternity, only Jesus can help them. I don't think people are ever going to come up to you and me and say, I've got some worries and problems, and I have questions, and I have concerns, and I'm coming to you because I think you might have the answer. I don't think that's going to happen. But Jesus Christ has been and always will be, as long as I believe as humanity exists, since he came to this earth to say what he said, to be who he was, and to do what he did. He has been the most important, influential, life-changing human being who's ever existed. If there is anything who's ever lived on earth that people ought to know about, or meet, or see, it's Jesus. If you've never met him this morning, I invite you to give your life to him, because he is worthy of your faith.